Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today for the Advanced PDF Accessibility Complex Tables session. Our session is being recorded for future on-demand viewing. There's going to be a Q&A pod that will appear on your left for you to send us any questions you might have. And just below that Q&A pod, you're going to see some demo files that you can download and follow along with. Also, in the top right corner, you're going to see some arrows on your screen. Feel free to click these arrows to move the presentation into full screen mode. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to our presenter, Rob Haverty. Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Lori. Hi, everyone, again. For those of you who've been joining us, I am going to share my screen. We are in the third of our series. The first two presentations were also recorded, and those recordings are now posted up on the registration site. So if you just go back to where you registered for these, you should see the links to those recordings. And as I mentioned previously, these all sort of build. So last time we talked about the basics of creating an accessible PDF, and this time we're going to move beyond that and talk specifically about complex tables. Before I do that, I just want to do a brief little refresh on the basics. And we'll walk through some of these again, but you may remember, if you joined us before, that there is some setup you need to do with the table editor and setting up those options. And we'll talk about those. In Office, you have the ability now, when you're creating a table, using the design ribbon to set the first row as column headers and the first column as row headers. So this will help you on basic tables. Unfortunately, there's nothing to do once you have nested header cells. The basics of fixing a table, you need to make sure you have all your header cells correctly identified, and you also need to make sure that you have added the scope. This does not get added automatically, and it makes it difficult for screen readers, and it will fail at PDF UA tests like the PAC3 tool if you do not have scope set for your cells. And we'll talk a little bit more about these again as we go through the actual tables. All right, so complex tables. I had switched over to this one, which was sort of my first introduction to a complex table. And you can see that we have multiple header cells that are nested. Some are merged, some are unmerged. There are merged cells under unmerged cells. This gets to be really complex and really ugly. One of the things that you want to think about when you are working with tables is how it got to be a PDF. And you may want to try different conversion methods. You will find you will get different results if you use the Acrobat tool, if you use the built-in tagger built into Acrobat to auto-tag it and you bring it in untagged. If you are using Word, if you're using some of the other tools out there, everybody does tables a little bit differently. To my knowledge, however, if anybody tells you they have a tool that will automatically make your table perfect, unless it has only one row of column headers and one column of row headers, that's just not possible. It is impossible to know which of these cells in here are header cells and which are data cells. We're working with machine, but complex tables will always require manual repair. Sometimes when you do that repair, you may want to start fresh. You may want to bring it in with a different conversion tool. You may want to, I have even gone to the point of where I've just converted every single cell in the table into a data cell with a column of one and a column span of one and a row span of one, just so that I can bring it all kind of into understanding. Sometimes when it's auto-generated, cells are combined, cells are merged, and it can get really messy. And so sometimes I just go all the way back to the basics. And there have been occasions where I've actually gone and deleted the table tag altogether and manually recreated it using the reading order tool. That is a worst case scenario, but you may find that you have to do that on certain tables. All right, so let's jump into the table, and not that one. Let's jump into this tables first. All right, so I have a couple of tables in this document that you'll be able to play with. As you may recall, those of you that have participated before, you should have all of the files that we are going through today available for you to download, as well as the solutions. So you can work on these on your own and then go and check your work and see if you've come up with something at least similar to what I've done. I have two different tables here. One is sort of the top one is sort of a simple complex table. It's only got, a little bit of nested stuff and merged stuff. The one below that is actually somewhat of a dumbed down recreation of that pavement table that I showed you before. And so it has a little bit more complexity. You will also notice that I've added some little cheats in here by saying, this very first, in the first table in the top leftmost cell, it says merged header, column, and row. So I know it's a header cell, and I know that it's merged for both column and row. Whereas I've got an H1 cell, which just tells me it's a header, and it's not merged. It probably should be an HC1 because it's a column header, and I have an HR1 over here, which is a row header. So you'll notice I've given you some cheats, and I've got Ds for the data cells. So this kind of will help you figure out what should be done with this. I caution you to be careful as you're playing with the second table down there. You'll notice that there are merged cells that are of different width. Some are 4 columns wide and some are only 2 columns wide, and this one's 3 columns wide. So I've tried to make it as complex as possible for your testing pleasure. So as you may recall, if you were in last session, the easy way to get to the table editor today is just to select the table tag in the tag tree, right-click on that, and select Table Editor or the letter Q. Now you can always still go through the reading order panel and go and select the reading order tool and then select the table and then click on Table Editor in the reading order tool to get to this point. But this is a lot faster. So this may look a little different than any table that you've looked at before in Acrobat, because I have 3 colors showing here. I have the red, I have the gray, and I have the yellow. So let's see what those are telling us. So I'm going to select you can select any cell you want in the table, right-click, and go to Table Editor Options. So you'll notice, if you're familiar with this, the Table Editor Options, there is a new option added, Show Cells with Missing Headers. Now, by default, I believe this is sort of a reddish-orange color. It was too close in color to the header cell for me, so I changed it to yellow so that I could really identify. And this is telling us that we actually have some cells in the table that currently are not associated with any header cell. Now, we'll go through some complex steps to fix that, but the first thing you should always do is fix the header cells themselves. That may clean up some of this problem. And as you may recall, you have the option here with the label option to either show the cell type, the TH and the TD, in the individual cells or not. I have it turned off right now because it tends to cover up some of the text in the cells, and I want to be able to see that text. So I'm going to say OK for that. Now, when you are fixing header cells, or tables, there really is no rule or rhyme or reason about where to start and where to go. I typically try to start with the upper left-hand cell and work my way across and then down. But sometimes things are so messed up, I just have to find a cell that I know what it should be doing and fix that one, and then sort of work my way out and around. So I'm going to select the very top cell, the one that says Merged Header, and I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to go to Table Cell Properties. It's a header cell. It happens to be both a row and a column header. So we're going to select both for the scope. Scope is never, to my knowledge, at least in the Acrobat tool, scope is never auto-generated at this time. Working on so that when it's converted from Word and you'd have set the tags right in Word, we should be able to set this. Haven't gotten there. All right, so it is merged, and it looks like it covers 2 columns and 2 rows. So I need to change the span for the row and the column to 2. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to get the message that this may mess things up. OK, I'm OK with that because I know what I'm doing. I'm going to say yes. And now the change, this is the lavender color I chose for my merged cells. There's the black line of the cell, and then there's this red border around what we've sort of identified as the cell. And those are not perfectly aligned. In my worldview, this is a bug, and this is something we need to fix because it can sometimes lead to confusion when it bleeds over too far on another cell, and you can't actually select that cell. So sometimes, like I say, I have to work backwards. All right, so we know that this next one is a merged header. It's column only, and it's merged over 6 columns. So I select that one. I right-click. I say Table Cell Properties. It's a header cell. It is column, and the column span was, 6. I'm going to say OK. Now look, all of my yellows are gone. And all of these data cells know that they're associated with this. So sometimes just fixing these header cells and making sure that you have set the scope will clean up that data cells that aren't associated with a header cell. This actually now comes down to being a relatively simple table because I've got 6 more header cells. I can hold down my Shift key and I can select all 6. I can right-click, go into Table Properties, make those a header cell. They are column headers, and they have a span of 1. And say OK. Those are all now correct. Now, I could multi-select here, but when I have 2 rows or 2 columns that I'm merging, I don't like to do a multi-select. It sometimes doesn't work. So I tend to do those types of things individually. So I'm going to select the topmost cell, MHR1, right-click, Table Cell Properties. It's a header cell. It is a row header, and it looks like it spans 2 rows. Let's say OK. I'm going to do the next one. Same thing. Table Cell Properties. Scope is row, and it spans 2 rows. And I'm going to say OK. And we seem to have had a little bit of a problem. So let's see what happened there. Oh, I know what happened. Okay, so the first one looks good. Second one. I made it a column instead of a row span. There we go. And now we're good to go. So you'll notice when you do make mistakes, it's relatively easy to fix them. I'm going to select all 4 of these because these are all single cell headers and they are row headers. I'm going to right click, table cell properties, header cells, and they are row. And then we are done. So we have now finished with this table. And at this point in time, I would save my file. And as I recommended previously, if you're going to be wanting to use these exercise files again, make sure you save it with a different name or you append it with something so it doesn't overwrite the exercise file. Although you can always go out and re-download those. And so this one now is in good shape. So not horrible to work with. Once you kind of get going and you just have to identify where are my header cells. Sure. So let's take a look at one with a slightly odd structure. Now as we look at this one, we'll notice that there are more header cells down at the bottom than there are at the top. Don't worry too much about the text in this. This was actually a sample given to me that came from a university's sexual abuse policy, and I used it at a class and I offended a whole bunch of people, so I rewrote it with some other information in there with all the same types of structural stuff. So you'll see a bulleted list, a numbered list, and so you can check out how those things are being tagged. Typically, we auto-tag those pretty well, whether you are converting using Acrobat or you're converting using the Word conversion. Either way, you'll get to fairly decent with the content within the table. All right, so let's go look at the table editor. And again, I just select the table tag in the tag tree, right-click, and select Table Editor, or I use the letter Q. Now, we tried to guess here as to what might be going on. You'll notice that we've got some merged cells. And so we guessed that fruit, apples, and bananas were all merged header cells because there were 2 columns underneath them. However, they're not all merged, and so we need to go through and we need to correct those. Now, you'll notice in this case, there are no yellows at this point. Go to Table Cell Properties. You'll notice that although we have a header and it is merged over 2 columns and has a column span of 2, it does not say that it's a column header. The scope currently is never set, so you always have to go in and fix that. Go to Common Uses, nice simple header cell, but again, there's no scope, so we need to set the column. Now let's go to apples. So the tool guessed it was merged, but the reality is apples is a row header, and it only applies to this row. So the fact that there are other columns beneath it are irrelevant to this apples as a header cell. So I'm going to select that cell, right-click, go to Table Cell Properties. I'm going to give it a scope of 1. Scope of row. And I'm going to give it a column span of 1. Because this is a row header. It really doesn't care about the columns. I'm going to do the same thing with the bananas. Table Cell Properties, right-click, Table Cell Properties. It is a row header, and I'm going to give it a column span of 1. All right, so these 2 are all nicely cleaned up. The citrus, however, is a row header. The scope should be row that spans 2 other rows, lemons and oranges. So that one is set right. Then I need to select my lemons. And again, you're going to notice, When you click outside of the table, it's going to take you out of the table editor. You're going to notice again there's a black line here that is the border for the lemons cell, and the red for this is actually stretched out, and it makes it look like there's an extra cell in here, and there is not. So this can get very confusing. I hope to get this fixed before too long, because I know it drives me crazy. So that's a row header, and table cell properties, header cell, and that's a row header. Okay, so to this point, we've done nothing amazing or interesting, really. All we've done is correct the scope and set the spans and got the merge cells done correctly for the way that we want them. So we are essentially done. But because I know the data for lemons and the data for oranges is just a weird header structure, I'm going to go in and set the header cell IDs for these. So let's select the first data cell, the lemons data cell. I'm going to right click, and you'll notice there's a new thing that pops up here. This has been popping up all along, but I haven't pointed it out till this point. It used to be that you had table cell properties and table editor options. You also have the option to auto-generate header cell IDs at this point, if you so choose. This will create a header cell ID for every single header cell. So you don't want to do this until you've got your header cells all right. Now, let's say for some reason I didn't know that was there, I didn't do it, whatever. I can still go into my table cell properties, and now we are talking about this ID field here. And so if I need a header cell ID to associate this data cell to, you'll notice that if I click on the add, I want to add a header cell ID, I will get a dialog that says, oh, you don't have a header cell IDs. Do you want us to auto-generate them? And I can say yes at this point, and it will do so. I'm going to say no. I'm going to cancel out of this, and I'm going to go back and do it here instead, auto-generate header cell ID. So I can do it in one of two places. So if I haven't done it, I don't have to go in and manually create those header cell IDs anymore. We will auto-generate it for you, even if you're further into the tool and you are starting to associate header cell IDs. So I'm going to auto-generate. Nothing happens. Doesn't look like anything happened. There's no progress indicator. It happens pretty quickly. So now I go back into my lemons data, and I right-click and go to my table cell properties. Out of the way a little bit. And now I'm going to associate my header cell IDs. So if I click the plus, I will see a drop-down list of my header cell IDs. And they are sort of in reverse order as they appear on the table, going from top left, left to right, and then down. So you'll notice the very first one is the bottom of the list. It says R1C1 underscore fruit. So what we do when we auto-generate the header cell IDs is we will give you the row number, the column number, and the first 8 characters of the text to help you know exactly which one it is. So I'm going to exit out of that for a second. When you are creating your header cell IDs, this is very much like PowerPoint reading order. The reading order is from bottom up. You cannot currently sort these in any way, so if you create it and you got the reading order wrong, you'll need to delete a header cell and then re-add to get the reading order right. So if it's reading order from bottom up, I need to look at my table and say, well, what do I want the screen reader to do when it gets to the lemon cell? Well, I want it to say, we're talking about fruit, we're talking about citrus fruit, we're talking about lemons, and we're talking about their common uses. So I will select the fruit ID first and say OK. Then I will select the citrus ID and say OK. Then I will select the lemons ID and say OK. And then I will select common uses and say OK. So when you have data cells where it's just not going to be clear what the order should be for identifying the header cells, and I want it to read fruit, then I want it to say citrus fruit, and then I want it to say oranges, and then I want it to say common uses. And so there we have it, remembering that it reads from the bottom up. You cannot resort this, so for some reason citrus shouldn't have been there, I'm going to have to actually just select all of them that I need to delete, and select the minus sign to delete it. And then I'm going to have to go in and recorrect my list and add them. So in this case, because that one was right, I need to go back. Where am I? Let's see. Okay, so I got citrus, oranges, and common uses. All right. So there we have that one all set again. So then we just say OK. And now we have corrected those, so when the screen reader gets to the oranges or the lemons, it's going to know that, oh, the header cell IDs related to the oranges data cell are, or the header cells are fruit, citrus, oranges, common uses. Oranges too have a wide variety of uses including. So it will read the proper relationship for those. But don't do, I did not do the first two because these are pretty straightforward. You have fruit, apples, and common uses. So there's nothing odd about these. It's just a single one-to-one relationship. And the screen readers typically will do okay with those. It's once you start getting these buried cells in there and you have unusual layout that I worry the most. But you can always test with a screen reader to make sure that you that it's reading it correctly. So I'm going to exit out of that without saving. And let's do it. Go back into it. Just want to do it one more time. So again, I select table in the tag tree. I can go through the route of the reading order panel and the reading order tool, which you may recall was called the touch-up reading order tool. It's now been changed to just the reading order tool. But I can just select table, right-click. I can hit the letter Q, the table editor, and I'm in my table editor. And I probably should have saved the other one, but let's just do this real quick again. So I need to set, that's a row header, apples and bananas. Set the table cell properties. It's also a row header. And then citrus is a row header. Whoops. Row header. And lemons and oranges are header cells and are also row headers. All right, in a perfect world, I would also make this one, give it its scope of column, and give this one its scope of column. Unfortunately, there is no way to kind of automatically generate that at this time, to my knowledge. Certainly not with Acrobat. All right, so I have those. I go back to my lemon data cell. I'm going to right-click on that, and I can auto-generate the header cell IDs here, or I can actually go into the table cell properties and say, oh, I want to add associated header cell IDs, and it will say, you don't have any. Do you want to auto-generate these? I could set this to automatic by saying, remember my choice. I never do because I'm always doing demos. And so I'm going to say yes, and up pops my list of header cell IDs. So very simple way now to get those header cell IDs created. Easy to understand what they are related to because we give you the row number, the column number, and the first 8 characters of the text. So it makes it easier for you to find which ones they are. Okay, so we may come back to this, but I want to take a look at tables that span multiple pages. Now, depends on how you created these. Let's save this little guy first. Back to it. All right. So here's the interesting thing about tables that span multiple pages. If it is created as one table and then converted into a PDF, so you've just got one table in your Word document and it happens to go over multiple pages, and you converted it to a PDF, it will recognize this in Acrobat as still being just one table. So when I get down to, for example, the state of Idaho, it will read the column header state at the very top of the table. Now, in Word, in order to get the table headers to show on each page, depending on how many pages the table spans, you have to say repeat header row. So you select the repeat header row, and it will show it every time there is a page break. Problem with that is it will also get tagged as a header. So in this particular instance, in this PDF, when I got to Idaho, it would say state, Idaho, 2013 population, 1 million, blah, 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 blah. Because it's going to read the header at the very top of the table, and because we said repeat header row, it is going to read the header at the top of each page as well. So you're going to get it duplicated. So you have two options. One option would be to create a table hang on, folks. There we go. All right. One option would be to create one that you didn't choose to repeat the header. But then you run into the problem of you don't have your headers visible on each page. And this makes it hard. You know, obviously this one's really easy. It's only got 2 columns. But in any kind of a multi-column table, it makes it really hard to know what those are. So you probably are going to always go with the option of repeating the header row. What we need to do at that point is the same thing that we did 2 weeks ago in the basics. We go into the tag tree, select the little luggage tag, and it doesn't really matter. I can select any cell here in the tag tree. I can right-click, and I can open my reading order tool. Now remember, you can also go through the Z-order, the reading order panel, and go up to the drop-down menu, select reading order tool, go into the reading order tool, select in the table itself, and then select table editor in the reading order tool. Even takes a long time just to say that, let alone to do it. So I'm going to just use the tag tree, right-click, and select reading order. And get out of that for a moment. Oops, I'm on the wrong page. All right, I go to page 2, select my reading order tool, and I'm going to need to artifact this top set of cells so that they are not read twice. So I'm going to select the number. I've got the number 5 selected, and I'm going to artifact that. And you're going to notice that underneath that is a number 2, and I'm going to artifact that. Underneath that is a number 1, and I'm going to artifact that. Now it's clean. So there are a number of things in that table tag that have to do with the layout of the cell and the data in the cell and all that. Just go ahead and artifact all the way down until there are no numbers left for these 2. And now the screen reader will read when I exit out of here. When it gets to Idaho, it will only read state and population once as the headers instead of reading them twice. So the only way to do this, in my experience, the only way to do this in the best possible way so that it is most usable visually and most usable with an assistive technology is to go ahead and set repeat header cell, if you're creating this in Word, and then artifact those extra headers on the subsequent pages. All right. So again, not hard, just time-consuming. And this is the biggest thing about PDF accessibility is there's a lot of things that are not hard or that we have made less hard, but they still are time-consuming. We've tried to make them less time-consuming. Like we did here, with allowing you to auto-generate. I lost the one I saved, I don't know where it went to. Reset this one quickly. One other thing to note is when you're in the table cell editor, you cannot use your keyboard to multi-select. The keyboard will navigate. Whoa, tablet's doing some weird things. All right. The keyboard will navigate instead of multi-select. Right. Row header. Okay. So again, we can go into here now and we can easily auto-generate those header cell IDs. So you don't have to, so we've saved you time, so you don't have to go in and manually generate those header cell IDs. And if we go back to this one. I've now selected the second table. I'm going to go into the table editor. Again, just right-clicking. So we end up with the same problems with this one we had with the other one. And once we start identifying header cells, we will clean up these data cells. Now, this is another one that, because it has some kind of funky stuff going on here where I've got single header cells followed by merged header cells, I might want to create the header cell IDs and do that association, which is a lot of work when you have a large table. And so you may want to get your header cells all correct and then run it with a screen reader and see how it's doing. If it seems to be identifying the header cells correctly to the data cells, then don't go through that extra work of associating the header cell IDs. If it's not, then you're going to need to go through the work of associating the header cell ID. However, once you have cleaned up, so if we, again, we take this merged header column 1, and I do table cell properties, and it is a column header, and it spans 12 columns. Okay. Wow, I really messed that one up. So I did something wrong. And now I've got nothing showing up as, not even sure what happened there. So again, like I mentioned before, what you may want to do, or what I typically try to do, right table, is start with the upper leftmost cell and get my merge in there first, or get that cell done correct first. So this is a header and column, so it's both. It covers it's a row and column header, so it does both. It covers 2 columns. Looks like it's covering 3 rows. I'm going to say 3 rows. Say OK. Yes. Now we're fine there. Now we'll go back to that one. Table cell properties. Column span of 12. Say OK. And now we're good to go. So sometimes when you grab a cell, when I grab this cell, it may have thought it was more than just that cell that I grabbed, and so then it kind of messed everything up. So I try to start top left and work my way through. Sometimes I can't. And so then you just have to start guessing. Or, as I've done with complex tables, turn everything into a data cell and start kind of from square one. Don't let it guess for you, because if it's guessing wrong, I want to fix it myself. So there you have it on complex tables. Seems like a scary subject, but really when we get down to it, a complex table is really just a simple table with more header cells involved in it, or an odd structure. And so you just need to know how to get all your header cells set correctly, and whether you need to set those header cell IDs and associate them correctly with the data cells. And in this case, like I say, I would run this through a screen reader, because the fact that I have all of these single header cells, single column header cells, and I'm only going to do the first 6. Click. They are header cells, they're column headers, and they have a span of 1. And then I have another merged underneath that. Header cell, column, that first one goes over 4 columns. And again, don't get confused by these funny little lines with the red that it looks like. I added dark borders on some of these merged cells so it would be easy for you to identify them. Header cell, column. In that case, it now spans only 2 columns. And so again, it's a little off-centered here. So don't trust entirely to the visual colors. Trust to what you're doing and knowing that you've correctly identified that. I can go back into that one and I can double check and say, yep, it's a span of 2. So I'm good to go. So not the end of the world. Extra work to do, and we've made it a little confusing for you sometimes because we don't have these cell identifiers lined up exactly correctly to the cells. So I hope this helps. As always, feel free to, oh wait, do I do that? As always. Can't do it as always, so I get down to as always. All right, so in the deck itself, there are links for a bunch of resources that can be helpful. As always, you can contact me. Again, I have to apologize. I'm behind on getting back to you between, unfortunately, illness and weather in the Northwest that we never get that knocked out my internet. I'm running behind still. So I will be getting caught up, though. So do feel free to contact me. I love your complex issues. So, that's how I learn, and that's how we make the tool better. So don't hesitate to contact me with any questions. Lori will be capturing all the questions that were in the chat pod, and I will be sending out responses to those. So feel free to continue to add those. At this time, let me see if there's anything. I apologize for all the audio issues. But feel free to add questions into the chat pod. Feel free to email me. But at this time, we're going to give everyone 3 minutes back and call it a little bit early. Lori?
Thanks, Rob. Everyone, you can feel free to continue asking any questions you might have in the Q&A pod there. Also, you should be aware you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. So we'll hopefully be able to get the audio issues out of the recording, and you can go ahead and listen to it again if you need to. But at this point, we're going to go ahead and to conclude the audio portion of today's session. And we want to thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you. And we want to thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you.